And now for more on President Lee's trip to Turkey and Mongolia, we're joined today by Dr. Daniel Connolly, Associate Professor of International Relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Connolly, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So President Lee was at the NATO summit in Ankara, and he aimed to boost defense cooperation with NATO countries. And what he suggested was that Korea and the alliance move beyond simply buying and selling weapon systems and build a new partnership focused on jointly developing, producing, and operating these defense systems. What's your take on this plan, and how are Korean weapon systems currently viewed in Europe?
Well, I think it's definitely a perfect time for what President Lee called the Defense Industry Partnership 2.0. And this is because Europe right now, they gave away a lot of their gear to Ukraine. They're under huge pressure from the United States to increase their defense budgets. But the irony is even if a lot of these European countries want to buy American weapons, America's own kind of war in Iran has depleted a lot of these systems. So Europeans are quite low down on the list of purchasers. And this means that South Korea right now is in many ways a perfect partner. It has the industrial capability to build a lot of these weapon systems. And the weapon systems that Korea builds have a very strong, we could say DNA with US technology, NATO technology. There's a lot more compatibility there than many alternative arms industries. But there is resistance. Europe has its own very strong arms industries. And a lot of countries like Germany are actually competitors with South Korea in export markets. This is why NATO membership is kind of like a fence, keeping outsiders out. And we see this just recently with Canada's decision to buy submarines from Germany and Norway rather than South Korea, a decision that a lot of people have identified NATO membership was kind of the deciding point in making that decision. So I would see President Lee's proposed partnership as really an attempt to climb over this NATO walled garden and become a NATO-like arms supplier to the continent.
Right. And President Trump, he was also at the NATO summit, and he criticized European nations and accused them of abandoning the United States during the Iran war. And this was sort of widely seen as a major twist for an event that had been aimed at showcasing how alliance members were stepping up defense spending and focusing on support for Ukraine. What message was Trump trying to send to his NATO allies?
Right. And well, let's be honest, Trump is a bully, and Europeans are quite easy to bully these days. They're very militarily dependent on the United States. They're basically fighting a proxy war with Russia right now. They don't have a lot of room to maneuver. And I would say that in the last few years, when Trump bullies Europeans, the European states largely fall in line. And let's not forget NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte calling Trump daddy. This kind of encapsulates the whole dilemma that European states have. And at this summit in particular, they were really keen to brag about their increased defense budgets. And Trump rather instinctively decided to go on the offensive. So instead of treating Europeans kindly because of their defense budgets, he attacked them for not supporting him in Iran. This kind of put them on the back foot. And then, just on the last day of the summit, Trump responded quite positively to Europeans, reaffirmed Article 5. And I would say if you look at this entire summit, Trump by himself was playing good cop and bad cop with the Europeans and kept them off balance. And I would say this is part of his bargaining strategy.
I see. And what Trump also said is that the United States will give Ukraine a license to produce Patriot defense systems to counter missile attacks from Russia. What impact could this have on the course of the war? It's now dragged on for more than 4 years now.
Right. And in the short term, I don't think it will have a big effect. Definitely, it's a good diplomatic show of support for the Ukrainian state. But even the United States struggles to make 600 of these missiles a year. So it seems doubtful that Ukraine, which has its industries getting bombed by Russia on a regular basis, could do much better in the short term. Now, of course, Ukraine has a very strong arms industry and they are much more motivated than maybe US manufacturers. But the practical realities means it's going to take a long time before we see production lines actually producing missiles. It's also important to note that Trump apparently didn't consult with the US manufacturers of the missiles, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. They may not be overjoyed for their intellectual property to be given to the Ukrainians, and the details of the licensing agreement will be the tricky part. So I would say in the short term, no major change, but this war has gone on for 4 years. If it goes on for another 4 years, then it may have a bigger impact. And I would say this is characteristic of Trump deal making. Make flashy promises. The details are much more difficult to iron out in the future.
I see. And NATO countries are now planning to spend more than $50 billion over the next 10 years on a new long-range missile system. What does this suggest about the future direction of Europe's defense strategy?
Right. And globally, we are seeing a change in how wars occur. And a lot of scholars call this remote warfare, where two countries use long-range missiles and drones and cruise missiles to attack each other instead of using ground forces. And I would say that Europe's shift to building this missile system is a very pragmatic realization that traditional force projection is becoming somewhat obsolete in an era of missiles. I am a little skeptical, though. This again is a $50 billion promise. Will Europeans actually be able to come together and make this weapon system? That is maybe the open question. And definitely, this kind of missile project would be something that the Korean arms industry would love to participate in. South Korea already has a very strong expertise in these kind of long-range precision strike. But again, a lot of European states will want an indigenous solution, and President Trump would much prefer the Europeans buy an American missile. So this goes back to the opening question about the defense partnership and President Lee's kind of attempts to get into this NATO market.
Right. We'll have to see how that goes. All right, Professor Connolly, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.